Afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our MDQ Quilter 2 Block of the Month webinar for October 2015. This is called Putting It All Together. It was designed for you by Rita Gazard and presented by myself, Mark Garretts. I'm a National Floriani educator. And this webinar, as DJ said, is the 7th in our series that we've been doing for the last 6 months of putting a block of the month out. And we're going to put all the blocks together in this webinar to create a final quilt. And like I always want to do before we get started, I want to show you what the final project is going to look like. So as we go through both the software and the construction steps, you have an idea where we're headed. So this is what the final quilt looks like. In this particular picture, there's no binding on it. We had to snap the picture before we had a chance to put the binding on, but you get an idea of what the finished quilt is going to look like. If you look close at the top and the sides, you can see we have some border strips that we've added, and if you look really close, you can see that they're quilted. And those quilting stitches is what we're going to be creating today, and also showing you how to do a contiguous border design using the software. So that's going to be our software and embroidery section, and then the rest of it's going to be how to put this quilt together in what's known as a quilt-as-you-go technique, and it's one of the many possible ways you could put it together, but this is Rita's favorite way of doing it and also one of mine. So I'm going to go ahead and close this slideshow, and we're going to get right into the software section of our webinar today. So if you haven't already done it, if you're following along, you want to open up My Decorative Quilter 2. And if you don't see this screen, if you just see a gray blank screen, you want to come up here to the upper left and click the new page icon, and that'll give you a screen that looks something like this. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get our workspace set up so that we are all on the same page, both figuratively and literally. The first thing we want to do is check to make sure that we are in metric mode, and you can tell you're in metric mode because right here in the corner of the ruler there's an MM for metric, actually stands for millimeters. And if you aren't in metric mode, or even if you are, I want you to come up to the ruler, point your cursor somewhere, anywhere along the top ruler, and right-click, and make sure that it's set to metric here. And just a heads up as we go through this webinar, whenever I say click, that means a left click, and if I want you to right-click, I will specifically say right-click. So I also want to make sure that Show Grid is checked because we're going to use that grid today for alignment. Want to make sure that's checked. Snap to Grid should be unchecked. And lastly, come and click Grid Settings, and let's make sure our grid is set up the same way for everybody. So over here in your spacing for the horizontal and the vertical, you want to be at 10 millimeters for both the horizontal and the vertical. And your grid major wants to be at 25 for both. And all the rest of these settings you can leave alone, and then get everything set, click OK to lock those settings in, and now your screen should look something like this. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our border. Now we're going to have two sets of borders. We're going to have what we call a long border and a short border, and the long border is going to go along the long side of the quilt, and the short border is going to go along the short side of the quilt. So we're going to set up our long border first, and to do that, we need to know exactly what kind of dimensions we want to create our border stitches in. And we're going to use a really cool technique to do that, and that's drawing a box with our artwork tools, and that's going to be just essentially a set of lines that show us where we can put our stitches to make sure that we're both aligned and we're inside the box. And that's a great technique anytime you need to do something and make sure it fits within a certain area. But we're going to use it specifically for our border design here today. And we're going to do that with using our built-in shapes tool, our artwork shapes. And we're going to use the rectangle tool. Now my rectangle is already selected. If yours is not, click the down arrow and come and click the rectangle tool. When you do that and you move your cursor down into the workspace, you'll see you get a crosshairs and a little rectangle to remind you that if you click and drag now, you're going to draw a rectangle. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm just going to click and drag a rectangle, and you want it to be kind of a vertical rectangle. The exact size that you draw it, proportions, doesn't really matter. Also, the position doesn't matter because we're going to fix it. We're going to change the dimensions to get it exactly the way we want over here in our Properties box by using our Transform tab. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to click our Transform tab. And the first thing you want to do is make sure that Maintain Aspect Ratio is unchecked, because we are going to both independently adjust the height and the width of this. We don't want them to move proportionally. And one of the cool things about My Decorative Quilter 2 is that it allows us to make these parameters, these dimensions here, in either inches or millimeters, regardless of what we have our ruler set to over here. So I'm going to switch to inches mode over here. You can see now I have measurements in inches here, but I'm still in metric mode over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to set our width to 1.85. So I'm going to backspace over this and type in 1.85 inches. And right here in my height, I'm going to type in 6.2 inches. And then I'm going to click my Apply button. Remember that nothing happens over here until you click Apply. And now you can see that two things have happened. One, my box has grown bigger than my screen, so I can't see it anymore. And also, it's not quite centered. So let's take care of centering it first. To do that, we're going to come up here and use this tool right here, our Center Selected Objects tool. Since there's only one object on the screen, this is going to center that one object on the screen for us. And I'm going to go ahead and click it, and it's going to move it right into the center. So now it's perfectly aligned. Still can't see the whole thing, so I'm going to zoom out into what's called Zoom to Fit. So I'm going to zoom out so that everything that's on my screen fits on the screen. And the great shortcut way to do that, as we've shown you many times in these webinars, is to go ahead and double-click the magnifying glass icon. And then that brings our view so that we can see everything. And you can see now it's all nice and centered, and we're set to go. So the very next thing we're going to do is we're going to start to add some stitches in here to make our quilting stitches to fill out this particular border design. To do that, we're going to use a built-in set of stitches called our embellishments, and they are over here in our embellishments area, and the embellishments icon is right here. To bring them up, simply click on it. You're going to get a window, and the embellishments are organized into folders by themes, and you can see that the birds came up first, and we're going to use a heart theme. So we're going to click the down arrow. We're going to find hearts in the list, and you can see our hearts have popped up here now. And we're going to use this single heart right here. It's the only single heart. It's called Hearts O2D. So when you click it, it's going to bring that design into our design window. And you can see that this is made up of two parts. You can see there's an inner line and an outer line, and that outer line is artwork, and the inner line is stitches. Now we want the stitches. Sometimes that extra artwork outline is really useful for doing things like knocking out a hole so we don't stipple through it and things, but we're not going to use that particular feature in this particular design. So we're going to get rid of that artwork because otherwise it's going to end up being too distracting. So to do that, I'm going to come over here to my sequence view, and I'm going to click the first heart item, which is our Poly 739 Cleveland, and that is our artwork color. So I'm going to select that. I can tell it's artwork because up here in my properties it says artwork. If I click this plus box right here to expand, it would also tell me it was artwork. I'm not going to do that because I know it's artwork. And we're just going to simply come over here to our cut icon, which looks like a little scissors, and I'm going to click that to delete that artwork so that it's not distracting. And then the very next thing we need to do is we need to rotate this 45 degrees. But before I do that, I'm actually going to turn on 3D mode. Now, you don't need to do this at home. I'm going to do it so that these stitches are bolder so you can actually see them easier on your screens at home. So I'm going to turn on 3D mode, and that's going to make this just look a little bit bolder for us. But we're going to rotate this 45 degrees to the right, and I could do that manually, but I have a great tool right here, which is our Rotate Right 45 Degrees tool. Does it exactly what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and click that and rotate it right 45 degrees. And we want to position this up here. We want to move this heart so that the tip of the heart down here is right here on this line. So we're going to count down 1, 2, 3, 4 grid lines from the top. and we're going to be putting the right side of this heart right up against the right artwork line here. So I'm going to kind of move it into position in just sort of a gross fashion here, just to get it sort of in position. Then I'll zoom in so we can precisely position it. Now to move it, anytime I'm positioned over the item and I see that hand icon, that tells me that now I can move this element. So I'm just going to click now and drag it sort of up into position. I'm going to get on that fourth line and over towards the edge, and that's sort of in position where I need it to be. But I'm going to zoom in. Let me make sure. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep, that's correct. So I'm going to zoom into this area now so we can see a little bit better what's going on. And I'm going to do that with my magnifying glass tool or my zoom tool. So I'm going to click it. It's going to let me draw a box around the area I want to zoom into. So I'm going to zoom into this area right here. And I did okay with getting the point right there. Let me go back to my normal select tool. I did okay getting the point on the line. I'm maybe just a little bit below it, and I'm not quite over to the edge. So let me just quickly reposition it just a little bit finer, just how about right there, and that's about perfect. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to add a line in here. Oh, I'm sorry, I left out a step. We actually need to resize this a little bit. And no, I'm sorry, we're not going to resize this. We're going to leave this at exactly the same size. I apologize for that. It's the next thing we want to resize. I'm getting myself confused. So what we want to do is we're going to leave this here. We're going to put in a line that kind of curves out from here and kind of comes up and goes over to the top here. So what we're going to do that is we're going to use another one of these predefined shapes, and we're going to use this time our ellipse tool. To get to our ellipse tool, we are going to actually click the down arrow one more time, and this time we're going to get our ellipse. Now if I click and drag now, I will draw an ellipse, and I can make it any width or height. That doesn't have to be a perfect circle. But you know what? I want it to be a perfect circle. So what I'm going to do is I am going to hold down the Control key on my keyboard, and unfortunately you can't see me doing this, but I'm going to press my Control key first. Then I'm going to click and drag my mouse, and you see when I do that I get a perfect circle. So I'm going to create this circle, and it really doesn't matter what size I make it, because I'm going to resize it here in a second. Okay, so I'm going to let off now. Now here's an important thing. It's important to let off the mouse before you let off the Control key. If you do it in reverse, you're not going to have a perfect circle. So I'm going to let off the mouse, and that's going to put in an artwork circle for me here. And I'm just kind of looking at this here, and I'm realizing that this heart probably isn't the right size, and I'm wondering what I've done wrong. This should be filling out my design a lot better than it is. So I'm going back to my printed instructions here, and I'm finding out if I actually should have resized it, and the answer is no. Let me check my artwork box to make sure it came out the right size, and that may be our problem. And that's our problem right there, is that this size didn't stick. So this should be 1.85, and I'm going to click Apply. And I don't know why that didn't stick, but let me reposition this heart real quick here, and I'm just going to get it right back where we want it, so right up there. And now let's go back to our artwork circle. Okay, so I apologize for that. I'm going to reselect my artwork circle, and I am now going to do a couple things with this. First of all, we need to resize it to the size that we need. So I'm going to again come over to my Transform tab. This time I want to maintain that perfect circle, so I'm going to check Maintain Aspect Ratio. And I am going to now go into millimeters mode. So I'm going to click millimeters right here, and you can see now I'm in millimeters. Now I want my circle to be 40 millimeters. So I'm going to change that 34.7 to 40. And you can see the bottom one changes to match because I have a Maintain Aspect Ratio checked. And I'm going to go ahead and click Apply. You can see my circle got a little bit bigger. Now, we don't want a complete circle. What we want instead is we want just half a circle. And so to do that, we are going to cut this circle in half. And the way we're going to do that is with our shape tool. So I'm going to come over here. It's the second icon down on the left, and I'm going to click my shape tool. And when you do that, you see that my circle changes. I no longer have a bounding box, but I have these 4 blue rectangles in the corners of the circle here. We call these points or nodes, and my shape tool allows me to change the shape of these nodes and where they are and do other fun things with them. And you'll see we're going to use that a lot in this particular software exercise. So the first thing we want to look at is when I get close to a node like this one on the top, you can see that my cursor changes and I get that little blue dot by it. That little blue dot tells me that if I were to click now, I will be affecting this particular node that I'm close to right here. So I'm going to get over that node and I'm going to right-click on it. When I do that, you can see I get a little menu here, and one of the items on the menu is called Split Line. And so I'm going to go ahead and click that, and that's actually going to create a split right here. So I used to have a contiguous circle. Now I have a split here. You can see I've still got one object that's just got a split in it, and for this particular object, having one split doesn't really make a big difference. But if I come down here to the bottom and I repeat that procedure, so I'm going to put in another split line down here at the bottom by right-clicking on the node and selecting split line. You can see now I've split that circle into a left half and a right half. So I've got 2 pieces of artwork. Now we're just going to use the left half. So I'm going to click on the right half over here in my sequence view to select it in normal select mode, and I'm going to delete that right half. So I'm going to come up here to my cut tool, and I'm going to click it, and now I've just got a left half of a circle. All right, now we need to get this aligned to where we want it to be. So before we do that, we need to take this piece of artwork and we need to turn it into stitches, because artwork is a stitch, and we need a run stitch here in the shape of this circle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to my one-click wonders tool down here at the bottom, and this converts from one type of stitch or artwork to another, and I'm going to click the run tool right here, and that's going to give us run stitches here in the shape of this semicircle. Now if you look over here in my sequence view, you can see what actually happened is I didn't actually convert this semicircle artwork into a run stitch. What I did was I left the artwork alone and made a separate run stitch. Now that's a great feature of my Decorative Quilter 2 because a lot of times we want to leave this artwork behind so we can do something else with it. In this particular instance, however, we don't want to do that. So I'm going to select this artwork and I'm going to get rid of it so it doesn't bother us in the future. So I'm going to click my cut icon and get rid of it. So that gets rid of that artwork, and now we can start to manipulate it. Now the first thing we want is we want this particular set of stitches to stitch out first, and it's the way it is now going to stitch out after our heart. We want it to stitch out first. So to move it, I'm actually going to click it, and I'm going to drag it up above the run stitch so it's aligned with that first artwork rectangle, and click it, and it's going to drop down below it. So right here now I've got my run stitch, and then I'm going to do my heart. So I've got my sequence correct, and now what I'm going to do is get this aligned where we want it. Again, I'm going to move my cursor over in, and when I get over the center or other places, but I'm just going to use the center point. You see I changed to the hand, and now I can reposition this. So I'm going to reposition and drag this so that the bottom of the circle lines up with the tip of the heart. So I'm just going to put it right there. And now we've got that in position. But I've got a few other issues here. Number one is it's coming out the side here. It's coming out the top over here. And I don't really want a real semicircle like this. I want kind of a more swirly shape. So we're going to, again, use our shape tool to fix this. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click my shape tool. And you can see that it now changes. But now that we have stitches and not just artwork, we have some extra things on the screen. We can see our blue node right here, and we can see a red dot here and a green dot here. Those red dots and green dots, those are our entry and exit points, or basically our start and stop points for where our stitches are going to start. Now, there's blue nodes under here, but they're hiding. So in order to see them, I'm going to show you one technique. And I'm just going to slide this red stop point out of the way. So I'm just going to slide it along, and it's going to temporarily be here. I'm going to move it down to the bottom in a second, but I did this so that I can get to this blue start point. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click, and I'm going to drag it over here up just below the top of my window here, and kind of right above the top of that heart right there, and just let off the mouse. And now I've changed that angle over here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take advantage of the fact that my stop point is out of the way, and I'm going to drag my start point up to the place where I really want it to start. So I'm going to hover over it. You see when I get close to it, I've got that green dot saying now I'm going to affect this start point. So I'm going to click and drag it, and I can drag it right along the line, but I don't really have to. I out over here, and you can see it's going to hug the line. So I'm going to bring it right up to the beginning and let off the mouse. And now I'm going to move my start point down to the bottom. So now I've got my start point down to the bottom. Now this looks red up here like it's another stop point, but in reality it's a green point, and that's because it's selected. So when we click off it to finish in a second, you'll see it changes back to green. The last thing we want to do is we want to adjust this curve so that it's within the boundaries, and also so it's a little more aesthetically pleasing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over and hover over this last blue node here, and I'm going to click, and I'm going to drag it down into this area kind of right here. So kind of right in there. You can actually put it anywhere you want. I don't really like the shape of this curve right here. I could adjust it with these handles, but I'm going to show you another shortcut. This right now is what we call a symmetrical point, meaning if I move these handles, they're both going to move together. But if I change it to a smooth point, meaning that the entry and exit points of this curve is going to be a little bit different, it'll smooth it out for us. To do that, I'm going to right-click on the point, and I am going to click Smooth to change the point. You see how it smooths that curve out a little bit better for us. So I like the way this looks right now, so I'm now going to right-click to lock those changes in. So you can now see I've got my stitches starting here. It's going to run down here and then stitch my heart. So I've got this section all nice and done, and all we need to do now is we need to make more of these to fill out the rest of our block. So I've got the first stitch selected. I'm going to come down and I'm going to hold down my control button, and I am going to click on the second set of stitches, and it deselected the first one, I'm sorry. So I'm going to click both of them. So just click both of them so that they're both selected. And what we're going to do now is we are going to make a copy of this, and we're going to do that with our copy icon right here. So I'm going to go ahead and click copy, and I am going to click paste to insert that copy. Now I've got two hearts and runs right here, but they're right on top of each other, so you can't see them. But in my sequence view, you can see I've got another set happening down here. So what we want to do is we actually want to make this one flipped horizontally so it stitches out in the other direction. I'm going to do that with my flip horizontal. So when I flip it here, you can see I've got that second set of stitches. Now they're still selected. If I come into the center here where I've got that hand, I can drag it down out of the way. And what I want to do is get this actually not lined up right here. I want it down a little bit, and I can't see where I'm putting it, so I'm going to actually scroll down a little bit. And where I want it is I want it lined up over here, and I want it lined up down here on this grid line. So I'm going to click it and move it down to the grid line and in just a little bit, and now it's in the perfect position. But you can see we've got a little bit of a problem here, and that this curve doesn't really hit where we want it to. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to use our shape tool to modify the shape of that curve. We just want to do this one, so we're going to come over here and select this run in our sequence view, which is this second curved run in the sequence view. We're going to select our shape tool one more time, and we are going to, for a second, move this out of the way. Now, I could click and drag and move it out of the way just like I did before, but I'm going to take advantage of this to show you another cool trick to do with the shape tool. So we see a lot of things going on here. We see the start and stop points. We see our control node. If we had a more complex shape like a fill or stippling or something, we'd see, or motif fill, we'd see a lot of other control points. And sometimes we just want to use the outlines. We just want to do the outlines. So if I right-click on any point, I can select this edit from the top here, and I can choose what I want to see. So all is on by default. If I just wanted to modify the entry-exit, I could select that, but I'm going to just choose the outlines. So when I do that, it temporarily hides the entry and exit points. And that's another way of doing it, and the other way is to just slide it out of position. Now, in the printed instructions, it's going to tell you to slide it out of positions, but I just gave you a little bonus tip on how to do a cool thing with the software. So now I'm just going to hover over this point, and I'm going to click and just drag it up into position here so that it stitches where I want it, and then I'm going to right-click to lock that change in, and you can see when I do that, it goes back to showing me all my nodes. So what I've got now is I've got my second section all done, and I'm going to zoom to fit again by double-clicking my magnifying glass so I can see everything. I'm going to go back to my normal select mode, and I'm going to drag a square across all of this top section here. Don't drag it around the whole thing because we don't want to move our outline. We're just going to drag a square around the top section to select our stitches. So I've got our stitches selected, and what we're going to do is we're going to restitch them down here. So what, again, I'm going to do is click copy and paste. Now I've got another set, so I'm going to, again, get to the point where I see that hand and drag my second set down. Now, because I've spent some time making that second set fit in the top half of my rectangle perfectly, I don't need to do anything to resize my second set. I just need to get it positioned well. So I'm going to get it right in between the boxes and right in the proper points. Let off the mouse. And now I've got a nice set of stitches that fills my whole border design. Now we have a few more things we need to do to kind of clean this up and make it stitch the way we want. And the first thing we're going to do is we want to get this rectangle that's our border, our temporary border. We want to hide that and get it out of the way for a second so we don't accidentally modify that. One cool way to do that is to use in our sequence view here this eyeball icon. This is going to temporarily hide this element so that we don't operate on it and we don't see it. So I'm going to click that eyeball for this rectangle at the top here. You can see now my rectangle went away and we won't operate on it. Now if I come to my sequence view and I click all items, I've selected everything but not this rectangle because it hasn't been selected because it's hidden. All right. Now what we're going to do is we can operate on all these stitches as a single unit. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change our stitch length. The default stitch length is 2.5. To get a little bit nicer look and a little bit better curves, we're going to come in and we're going to modify it slightly to 2.5, and we're going to click Apply. Don't forget, nothing happens over here until you click Apply. So we have now reduced our stitch length on all the stitches to 2.5. Now, when we created this, we created it in two different colors. You can see that we've got this green and we've got this Indian spice color here, and you can tell we've got two colors because that's what's in our design colors in our design palette. We don't really want two colors. We want this to all stitch out in a single color. So since I can operate on everything all at once now, if I select any other color from my color palette down here, I will change that into a single color, a brand new color. Or I can reuse one of the colors that I have in my design palette. Do that. I'm going to simply click on color number 1, which is our spring green. I'm going to click on that, and that's going to change everything to spring green, and you can see my second color went away entirely because it's no longer in the design. Now I have a single color. Now spring green may not be the color that you want to stitch out. You can leave this as spring green. You can change it to a color you really want to stitch out. But you know what? It doesn't really matter what you have in the file because what matters is what thread you use in the embroidery machine. So it doesn't really matter. I'm going to go ahead and leave it spring green. Now we just have a few other things we need to do. One of those things is that we created all of these pieces out of separate pieces. And most of them are going to have tie-ins and tie-offs at the beginning and ending of the stitches of each one of these pieces. Now a tie-in and tie-off is a little knot that's made by the embroidery machine to keep your thread from unraveling. And they get automatically added to most stitch elements. So we're going to have a bunch of tie-ins and tie-offs in here, but this is going to stitch out contiguously. So we really only need one at the beginning and one at the end, and that's really all we want because we don't want all these extra knots in our design. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. With everything selected, we're going to come over to our Properties box. We're going to click our Commands tab. And right here at the bottom, you can see we have our tie-in and tie-off commands. And right now they're blank. And the reason they're blank is because we have a mixture of nones and basics in here. So some have them, some don't, and it can't figure out what to show us. So it's not showing us anything. But we're going to change them. We're going to click this down arrow for tie-in and select none. And we're going to select our tie-off and select none and click apply. Now that may not seem like the right thing to do because we've just eliminated all our tie-ins and tie-offs. But that's kind of a shortcut to clean everything up, to get rid of everything in the middle that we don't want. Now what we're going to do is go into our first element and add a tie-in. We'll go into our second element and add a tie-off. So what we're going to do is come to our run stitch, the very first one in our sequence, and we're going to go back to our Commands tab. You can see it's now set to none for tie-in. So we're going to change our tie-in to basic, and we're going to click apply. Now we've got a tie-in knot at the beginning. We're going to scroll down in our sequence view to our last heart in the sequence, go back to our Commands tab, and add a tie-off command. So we're going to add basic to our tie-off and click apply. And that's going to put tie in here, a tie-off down here, and no unsightly knots and extra stitches in the middle of our design. Now the very next thing we need to do is we need to create some alignment markers in here so that when we do this as a multiple hooping, we have some reference point to align these designs in our hoop so that we can stitch it out as a contiguous border. So in order to do that, we're going to use that artwork rectangle again. So we want to use it now, so we're going to unhide it by re-clicking our eyeball to bring it back. And it's set up to where we wanted our stitches, but it's not in the right size for our alignment marks because we need to allow some fabric on the outside, both for the design and also for our seam allowances. So we're going to make this rectangle wider. To do that, we're going to come to our Transform tab, and we're going to go back into Inches mode, and we're going to uncheck Maintain Aspect Ratio because we just want to change the width. So what we're going to do is we're going to uncheck Maintain Aspect Ratio, and we are going to select Inches mode. And we're back into inches, and I'm going to change my width from 1.85 to 2.75. So I'm going to come in here and change 2.75, and I'm going to click Apply. And you can see now it's wider. Now I'm not going to change my height, just my width. And what I'm going to do next is I am going to add some alignment marks on the outside of this rectangle. We're going to do that automatically with the built-in placement marks that are built into the software. And they're right here. It's our placement marks. Now don't confuse it with auto basting. We don't want to do that. We want to get right here with our placement marks. So we're going to click that, and when you click it, you have a choice of up to 8 placement marks to put in. You can put in all 8 in some designs. You can put in the sides or the corners. In this particular design, we're just going to use the corners. To select the corners, I'm just going to simply click each of the 4 corners in sequence like this. So I've got all 4 corners selected, and when I click OK, it's actually going to put in some alignment marks for us at the corners of that box. So they're going to be perfectly aligned to the corners of that box, and they go in black thread, and they're going to be up here at the top. Now if you want, you can stitch them all out to begin with and then come back and stitch the design. Some people like to put the first two, especially for contiguous design, stitch out the first two, then stitch out the design, then stitch out the last two. So we're going to show you how to do that if you want. So if you come over here to the very top item and you click the plus icon, which is our expand. So if you click that right here with this Floriani black, you can see I've got the 4 run elements that make up our 4 stitches. So these last two, these are our last 2 placement marks. So if I click the third one down and I hold down my control key on my keyboard and I click the 4th one down, I've now selected these last 2. Now you can click and drag them down to the very end, but I'm going to show you a shortcut way to do that. And that is if you now right-click on these 2, you'll see a menu pops up, and one of the items is a Move menu. If you hover over it, you'll get another little pop-up, and you can see I've got a bunch of choices here, and the one I'm going to choose is last. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and it's going to move them down to be the very last thing. So what's going to happen now is this is going to stitch out with my first 2 marks, my whole contiguous design, and then my last 2 alignment marks at the end, and this is going to end up being perfect. So the next thing we need to do is we just simply need to save this, and we're going to save this as our long border 6 times, and that's to remind us that this is the long border, and we need to stitch this out 6 times in a row to get our first long border, and we're going to do that by clicking our little save icon right here. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save, and that's going to bring up our Save dialog. Now I'm going to put these in the October 2015 MDQ projects, and you can see I've already got some in here. These get downloaded along with the project instructions when you download it, and they get put in here automatically. You can save it right over the top if you want, but in order not to do that, I'm actually going to rename it. So I'm going to name it My Long Border 6 times. Okay, so I'm going to do that, and I'm going to leave it in the WAF format because I want to retain this original. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and then what I'm going to do is I am going to save it one more time, this time in my machine format. So I'm going to come up here to File and click Save As, and then I would from here pick a machine format. Like if I wanted to stitch this on my Baby Lock multi-needle, I would come up here and select the PES version 9 multi-needle format, click that, and click Save, and that's going to save it as the PES file that I'm going to put on a stick and take over to my machine and stitch out. Now, one other thing that we need to do is we need to create our borders for the short side. Now, the short side border is going to look almost identical to this, except the design is going to be a little tiny bit smaller. It's going to be 2/10 of an inch smaller. It's not that much. We could recreate the whole design 2/10 of an inch smaller, but boy, that's a lot of work. So instead of doing that, we're going to do a shortcut. We're going to come up to our top of our sequence view, and we're going to click All Items, and we're simply going to resize this to the right size. Okay? So we're going to come over here to our Transform tab. We want to make sure that Maintain Aspect Ratio is still unchecked. We want to make sure that we're still in inches, and we're going to change this from 6 inches high, or 6.2 inches high to 6 inches high. So I'm just going to delete the 0.2 and click Apply, and you can see that's going to resize it. It's going to be a little bit squatter, but no one's really going to notice that in the final quilt. And all we need to do now is save this as my short border 6 times. So I'm going to come up here and click File, Save As. Don't click Save at this point. If you do that, you're going to overwrite the 6 file. So I'm going to change this to I'm going to change the wording to short border. So I'm going to change it to short. Okay, and I'm going to change 6. I'm going to change it to 5 because we're going to stitch that 5 times instead of 6, and I'm going to save it, and that's going to be my short border 5 times. And then I would save it again in my machine format. Now I'm going to show you one other thing you can do. In this design, it's going to require that you stitch it out in a 5x7 hoop in order to fit the length of this. And with a 5x7 hoop, since this is going to be 2.75 inches wide with our alignment marks, you're not going to be able to fit too wide in that hoop. But if you had a hoop that was slightly bigger than that, so let's say you had an 8x8 hoop, or you had a 6x7 hoop or something that would fit two of these side by side, you can stitch both of these out together. So I'm going to show you how you do that. So right here, we've got our all items selected. So that means everything is selected. So we're going to do copy, and we're going to do paste. And that's going to give us two identical sets of stitches. And I'm simply going to take one and slide it over and line it up with the first one. If I don't get it perfect, it's okay, because the second one's going to line up the same. But I'm going to get it right there, and that's going to give me two of these. So again, if my hoop is wide enough, I can stitch out two at once and then cut them apart. And these alignment lines, by the way, they make great cutting alignment marks as well as stitching alignment marks. And you can then slice it down the middle with your rotary cutter, and instead of having to rehoop this 6 times, or in this case of the short border 5 times, you can cut the number of rehoop. Well, you won't cut the number of rehoop. You will cut the number of rehoopings in half, but instead of doing 12 or 10, you can do 6 or 5 and stitch them both out together. All right, so that completes the software section of our webinar for today. And let's go ahead and get started with the construction. So I'm going to bring my PowerPoint back up, and I'm going to click through these first two screens because you've seen them both already. And let's just do a little quick overview of our project here. So again, as we mentioned earlier, this is the last project in this series of 6 blocks. We've done 1 block every month, and this, of course, is our final step. We've stitched each block 4 times. And now these 24 blocks are going to get joined together to create a 40-inch by 25-inch wall hanging. And we're going to do that with what's known as a quilt-as-you-go technique. And you're going to see the way that we do that. And the materials list that's going to follow right now, this materials list are just the materials for this particular step. If you want to see a complete list of all the materials you need, including all the fabrics and batting and things for the entire quilt, then you want to check out the complete list under block number 1. So you'll find that in block number 1. So for this particular set of quilt borders and the sashing strips that we're going to create, you're going to need some strips of quilted soft bamboo cotton blend batting. They want to be wide enough so that you can hoop them and longer than your fabric by about 5 inches. You're going to need some embroidery and bobbin thread. You want to choose colors that work well with your fabric choices, and of course that's going to be the fabric choice you choose for the border strips. You're going to need some invisible or matching top thread for sewing, and that's going to match your sashing strips or be invisible. You're going to need sewing thread to match the fabric, and again that's going to match your sashing or the back or whatever. So you're going to have to choose your thread color to match. These are what you're going to do your seaming with. And then you're going to need some Floriani applique wonder tape. You want it in the 1/4 inch width. You're going to need a minimum 5 by 7 inch or 130 by 180 millimeter hoop size. Again, as I mentioned earlier, if you have a hoop that's wide enough, so you want to be at least 6 inches wide. So if you had a 6 by 7 or 7 by 7 or something like that, you can do 2 of the border strips side by side in a hooping instead of just doing 1. And we'll show you that in just a second. And you're going to want a walking foot if you have one for your sewing machine. Okay, that makes it a little bit easier to do your stitching in the ditch, which you'll see. If you don't have one, normal foot will be okay. Now for your fabric for the borders, for your top fabric, you want 2 3-inch by 41-inch strips and 2 3-inch by 35-inch strips. Or if you're doing 2 up in the hoop, you can use a single 6-inch wide hoop, or not hoop, 6-inch wide strip for both of these, okay? So either one will do, and your backing fabric, same idea, just different fabric for the back. So dimensions are all identical. And for your sashing and binding fabric, for the front strips, you're going to need 12 1-inch by width of fabric strips. So cut them the entire width of your fabric, and they're going to be 1 inch wide. You need 12 of them. And you want to pick a color, obviously, of your fabric that goes well with your quilt. Your backing strips, you probably want to match your backing fabric, but if you want a contrasting fabric, that's okay. You'll need 12 strips 1 3/8 inches wide by the width of your fabric. And for your binding, you're going to need 4 2.5 inch by the width of fabric strips, and you're going to sew them end to end to create a contiguous binding, or you can do whatever you like for the binding. If you want to use already made binding, you can. And let's go ahead and embroider the design now. So what you want to do is load the long border 6x design into your machine. Using the longer set of strips, you're going to make a sandwich of the top fabric, the batting, and the backing fabric. So your top fabric is going to be on top, your backing fabric is going to be on the back, and they're going to face the correct way, just like they'll be in the final quilt, and your backing will obviously be in the middle. You want to make sure your top and bottom fabrics are aligned by holding the strip up to the light. So, get them all nice and aligned. And you're going to hoop this sandwich together near the top edge of the strip. And you want to make sure that when you hoop it, your design will be centered across the width of the strip. And you either want to adjust your hooping or adjust your alignment of the design in the machine if necessary. And then the next thing you want to do is simply stitch out the design and stitch out the markers. Okay? The next thing you want to do is you want to re-hoop this using the markers to line up the next stitch out. So to do that, you're going to have a little bit of the prior design in the stitch area of your hoop. So you're going to hoop right over it so that you can use that sticking into the design area a little bit so you can line it up. This is going to take some practice, but you'll get there. And so you're going to use your machine controls, whatever they are, to line them up. Next, you're going to repeat the stitching, and you're going to continue doing that sequence of stitching and rehooping until you have a total of 24 hearts on the strip. Now, that means a strip of 24. If you've done it double wide, obviously it's going to be 48 hearts. You're going to load the short border 5x design when you're done with stitching the first one, and you're going to use the remaining shorter strips and repeat the whole same procedure again, except this time you're only going to stitch out 5 repeats, so you'll have a total of 20 or 40 hearts depending if you went double wide. Next, you want to trim these border strips, and using the alignment marks as cutting guides is a great thing to do. So if you've just done one strip per hooping, you'll cut it to shape using the alignment marks. Don't cut through the middle. You want to leave it a contiguous strip. But you want to use the ends to align with. And if you have used a double wide, you want to also trim down the center to cut it into 2 long strips. So next, let's go ahead and assemble the quilt. First, you want to gather up all your blocks. They're going to all be trimmed to size, as we've told you in the previous instructions. And you want to arrange and rearrange them as you need to find a pleasing combination. Now, the picture here is going to show you one possible way, but there's a lot of different combinations you could choose. Just choose the one that you like, any orientations of the block that you like. And you want to use your floor, cutting table, or quilt wall to do this alignment. So when you get it all nice and arranged, we're actually going to identify these rows using some pins. So you can see here in the picture we've got horizontal and vertical rows. We're going to be talking about the vertical rows to begin with. So for each vertical row, you want to stick 1 pin in the top of block of row 1, 2 pins in the top of row 2, 3 pins in the top block of row 3, and you don't need any pins for row 4. All right? So once you've done that, we've identified the rows. Then we're going to stick a pin in the right side of each of the blocks of row 1, 2, and 3, and again, no pins necessary for row 4. So each block is going to have a pin stuck in the right side of it in order to identify the right side of each block. Next thing you want to do is stack all the blocks in row 1 on top of each other with the top block on the top of the stack. So you can see we've stacked them here. And then the next thing you want to do is take that stack and turn it 1/4 turn counterclockwise so that the side pins are at the top. You can see we've got multiple pins at the top and only a single pin on the left there. All right, so this is going to identify our direction. The next thing you want to do is turn the blocks right side down and lay them back out with the pins at the top, and you want to butt the blocks right up against one another in order so that the top block is at the left. Next, you want to pin your backing strip right sides together. So the right side of the strip is going to be against the back of the right side of the quilt. And you want to align that top edge nice and carefully to the top edge of the blocks. And you want to pin them at the lower edge because we're going to stitch along the top. All right, and I didn't mention it, but all these alignment pins that are going to be in there, you want to make sure you take them out when you stitch so that you don't stitch over the pins. All right, and then put them back in once you're done stitching so you know which blocks go where. Now, starting with the top block, you want to kind of loosely roll it up as shown here, and then you want to place your strip right sides together along the top edge of the block. And you can see that that top strip's a little bit narrower than the bottom strip. So we've done this kind of rolling technique so you don't have to pin the top strip, but if you want to pin it, go ahead and pin it. You don't necessarily have to. So once you've done that, you're going to kind of unroll it as you sew it, but you're going to sew all the layers together from the top using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and it's going to be from the edge of the strip. So what you're sewing here is you're sewing the top strip, the quilt block, and the backing strip together along the side. Your strips are going to be lined up to the edge of the quilt, and you're sewing with your walking foot all the layers together. So next you want to go ahead and press that top strip up, and you're going to leave the back strip unpressed or just down in position. And then we're going to cut the blocks apart. So what we've done here is we've kind of sewn it all together as a contiguous strip just to save a bunch of cutting and pinning and things because otherwise you'd have to do each block individually. So we've kind of done it as a whole row to save some time. So once you've got them cut apart, you're going to lay them back out on the design wall or the floor and in the order that they're going to go. You can see it in the first picture here. And then you're going to stack up blocks 2 and 3 just like we did for row 1. Then you want to assemble rows 2 and 3 just like we did for row 1. And then you want to return all the blocks to the design wall or the floor just like you see in the picture here. It's important to note, don't get too much in the sequence. You're not going to do anything at all with row 4 at this point. Okay, it's got nothing sewn to it, so row 4 is going to stay in place. Next, you want to take the top block from row 1 and flip it over and place it right sides together on the top of the block of row 2. So the two top blocks in the horizontal row this time are right sides together. You want to carefully line up the edge of the sashing strips together, and then you want to take it over to your machine and sew it together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now it's important that you're not sewing the sashing together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. That 1/4 inch is measured in from the edge of the quilt block. So there's going to be a 1/4 inch edge inside the block, and your sashing strips are going to kind of be hanging out there. All right? So then what you want to do is you want to open your blocks right side down and press them. And what that's going to do is, you can't see it in the picture here, but the top block, the top sashing strip, that's going to be completely attached now and pressed into place. Then what you want to do is take the back sashing strip, fold it over to the very first seam line, as you can see in the second picture here. So it's going to get folded over to the second seam line, and you want to press that in place. Next, you want to take a piece of applique Wonder Tape and stick it down to the edge of that fold. So it's going to be on the folded edge. So you're going to have it right on the outside there, the way it's positioned here. And you want to peel away the paper, and then you're going to fold it over to the second seam line and finger press it in place. And you can, if you want with the iron, you can press it to give it a little bit better hold. And that is going to position that bottom sashing strip in the perfect place where we can flip the block over now, and from the top you're going to stitch in the ditch along that second seam line using invisible or matching thread, and that's going to tack down our bottom sashing strip to the back of the quilt. And you want to repeat that until all the blocks are joined, and when you're done it's going to look something like the picture on the right there. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to use that exact same technique to join all of the blocks in all the rows, and we are going to then do the same things with strips to join all of the rows together. All right, so we're going to use the same technique of putting the sashing strips on just like we did for the blocks, pressing them using the applique wonder tape and joining them. So in this case, we're going to be treating our row as if it's a giant long block. Next, we're going to do exactly the same thing with our border strips. So we're going to add strips to those, just like we did to a block, and then we're going to join them to the quilt, just like we joined the rows of the blocks together. So you're going to do the sides first, then you're going to do the top and bottom borders to the blocks and the sides. The last thing you need to do is just bind it however you want, and that's completely up to you how you want to bind it. We're not going to show you how to do that because there's a lot of different ways to do it. But that's all you need to do. So we're just going to basically be repeating that same, adding the strips and sewing them and flipping and sewing just like we did for that very first block all the way throughout the quilt. It's going to go together a lot quicker. And if you're worried because we've got all these little separate pieces of batting, I know if this is your first quilt as you go, you might be worried that this isn't going to feel like a quilt and it's not going to be very stable. I want you to put all your worries aside because this is going to come out perfectly. If you hand this to somebody, they're never ever going to know that you did this as a quilt as you go technique. And trust me, it'll be just like any other quilt that had a contiguous piece of batting. So what we want to do now is thank everybody for attending. We hope that you will use this particular video along with the printed PDF instructions to recreate the project at home. Don't forget to post all of your blocks and your finished quilt on the Floriani Embroidery Facebook page because there is a contest for whoever posts all of their blocks and the best finished quilt. We're going to give out some prizes for the best looking quilts. And DJ, are you on the line?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. I hope I didn't put you to sleep. But we should give them some time to complete their quilt. So when do we want to call an end to the contest for that, where they have to get their quilts posted? We want to do like the end of December?
Yeah, I think that would be no, let's do end of November.
End of November. Okay. So you've got, at this point, we're in the middle of October, you've got about a month and a half to get your quilt and all your blocks put together and get them posted on Facebook. And then we'll announce the winners. How about in the December webinar? Is that a good idea?
Yeah, I think that would be a good way of doing it. And I do have a couple blocks to show.
Okay.
That we've had between the last webinar and tonight. So I want to go ahead and do that as well.
Okay.
Are we ready for that?
We're ready. So if I'm not mistaken, we have at least one completed quilt already, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And do you see my screen, Mark?
I don't. I still see mine. Do I need to end this? Hold on. Let me end the slideshow.
Oh.
Nope. I still see my screen.
Okay. Because it should see mine now.
Okay. Hold on. Okay. Now, yep. Now I see your screen. It was just me. I hope the people at home can see your screen.
Yeah. So that's one of the blocks that has been submitted. Here's another. This is block number 6, and here's another one with block number 6, and then here is actually one of the quilts that's been finished. So we've had our first one submitted, and it looks great, and we cannot wait to see everybody else's finished quilts. So this is pretty exciting. It's been a lot of fun doing this, and it's been a lot of work. A lot of techniques have been learned, and so I think it's been a fun, good project.
Yep, and I just want to add a few closing comments. One is you can see that even though this is the exact same quilt design as the one that we showed you in the webinar, you can see it looks completely different because it's used completely different fabrics and thread choices and everything, so it looks totally different. And you saw some of those blocks look completely different from each other. Even from the same quilter, they did them differently, and they know that's perfectly acceptable too. And I just want to let you all know that next month in November, we are taking a break because of the Thanksgiving holiday from the live webinars. So there will not be a live webinar next month in November. However, We will be posting a video and the project of the webinars, so you'll go ahead and download those both as normal. So you'll still get a project, we just won't be doing it live in November. That's still correct, right, DJ?
Correct.
Okay, and then we'll be back live with you in December. And just to give you a little heads up, in November, we're going to start over again with a new block of the month. And in this case, instead of doing just 6 blocks, we're going to do 12 blocks. So we're going to have a much longer sequence of blocks, a lot more techniques to learn, a lot more fun, and we'll be doing the same thing of creating a final quilt at the end and having another contest. So we hope you're having fun with this. I'm going to turn it back over to you, DJ, to say goodbye, and we'll see you all in December.
Yeah, we look forward to seeing it, all your posts on the Facebook page, the Floriani Embroidery Facebook page, and we look forward to seeing you in December. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.